Good afternoon. I wanted to speak to you about something that I think is very important but isn't spoken about often enough. And that's the media bias when it comes to missing minority women, children, and men. Did you know that last year alone there were over 47,000 adults and 58,000 children who were reported missing? As startling as these numbers sound, what's even more bothersome is the fact that many of these stories aren't told. Minorities are going missing at alarming rates, yet media, both local and national, are doing very little to report on these stories. If we take a look at the number that I gave you initially, which is 47,000 adults, if we break that number down, 22,000 young women are missing, have been reported missing last year. If we look into that number, 8,600 of those women are categorized as minorities, meaning they were either African American, Asian American, or Native American. Now, Hispanics and Latinos were not categorized as minorities, but they were categorized with Caucasians as, and if you look at that number, it's 13,500. I can't give you a specific breakdown of how many Latino, Hispanics to white or Caucasian women go missing, but to even think that that number is so high yet so few of those stories are told is very alarming. A perfect example of the media bias that's created is the stories of Stepha Henry and Natalee Holloway. Now, in no way am I trying to say that any story is more important than the other or that one story needs to be told, versus another story, but I think that all of these stories need to be told. Stepha Henry was a young 22-year-old woman who went missing in Miami last year. She got some local coverage for about a day or two, maybe at most a week. But Natalee Holloway was a young woman who was, I believe, 18 years old who went missing in Aruba, who got basically nonstop coverage. She was covered morning, noon, and night, local and national media. What's the difference between Natalee Holloway and Stepha Henry? The only thing that I could think of was that Natalee Holloway was white and Stepha Henry was black. Now, what angered me about the Stepha Henry story was the fact that national news media such as MSNBC decided that her story wasn't important enough at one time because they were going to give constant coverage to the Paris Hilton going to jail for 24 hours or however long it was at that time. Can you imagine how her family felt knowing that they weren't getting any support from the media, local or national, when it came to finding this young woman? Both of the stories were made for headlines. Both young women were on vacation. Both young women met up with some men. Both women ended up missing. Yet Stepha Henry's story was deemed not as important, even though it happened on our own U.S. soil, versus Natalee Holloway's, which happened in international soil. Now, if we look at the number of young children that are gone missing, I told you that's 58,000 are reported missing every year, or last year alone. 47% of that number are young minority children, including Hispanic children. Now, how startling is that number, and knowing the fact that the local media covers virtually 5 or 6 of those stories a year. Everyone knows about poor Caylee Anthony, which was the saddest story I think anyone's ever heard, with that poor little girl being murdered at the hands of God knows who. What about the story of Sharice Iverson, a young black girl who was killed in Nevada in a casino at the age of 7 years old? Her story wasn't told as much as of poor Caylee Anthony's story was told. And I just think it's fair that the media is creating an unnecessary bias when it comes to the stories that they choose to report on. Now, the reason behind this potential media bias could be the fact that, according to the National Radio and Television Committee, 13% of journalists in America are minorities, both Hispanic or black. And if you look at actual media in terms of newsrooms and corporations, 22% of the workforce is made up of minorities, while 32% alone of the U.S. population is Hispanic or Latino. The reason I decided that this was something important to talk about was because you never know when your family may be the victim of something like a missing child or wife or mother, etc., husband. And I think that the media needs to create a system where everyone gets an equal share of time and opportunity when it comes to helping to find these missing adults and children. The reason the media is so important is because if the media focuses on a story, it forces the local authorities, whether it's the police or the FBI or whatever, to get involved, and heightens the chance that these young women and children and men would be found. Hopefully you found this to be informative and that's something for you to think about. The fact that many of the stories that are told to us don't reflect everything that's going on in the world, and the media plays a much more important role than they like to let you know. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed.